enterprise. I'm not going to hear either. Yeah, you never know what.
There's a farm conference in Charlottetown.
And all the farmers are there, are they?
Must be.
Not
all.
Well, I made some inquiries about that. I'm speaking tomorrow morning at 10. They only gave me 15 minutes, but I didn't ask to go. We got all these people with PhDs and everything like that. So it's at the Rod Royalty. I inquired how many people would be present. They told me that maybe 70 to 100. But anyway, so we're here tonight. Do you guys all know each other? No?
Yeah.
Okay. For the benefit of Karen and myself. Okay. Alan Graham. Okay. And Karen. Okay. And Mr. Dunbar. Okay. And Mr. Pridham. Okay.
Yeah, Ivan Hardy.
Ivan Hardy. And this is Tony from the Journal.
Tony Gallant.
Tony Gallant from the Journal. Okay. And this is Patrick Carroll. And he's my scribe tonight. And we have a couple of people here that are doing various other things and so forth. And Karen was at the meeting in O'Leary, which had to be postponed. We had it on a Saturday afternoon. And anyway, it was a room that was a little different like this. And it was a nice afternoon. So anyway, I'm here to have the opportunity to meet with you, to listen to you, to hear what your comments are, your concerns, your suggestions, your ideas, anything pertaining to the Lands Protection Act. And if you just look at the handout that you were given, the long piece of paper, it indicates that in November, the government saw fit to appoint me. In September, they asked for applications of anyone who was interested in studying, holding hearings on the Lands Protection Act to apply. And I did. And you were to give your background and your knowledge of the island, the association with Lands Protection Act and so forth. They seemed to indicate from the inquiry that was put in the paper, the ad, they were looking with someone with some association with the law. So I filled out the little form, put a covering letter, and closed the resume, and my wife and I went off on holiday and came back and found out that I had been appointed. And I indicated that they could make the appointment in November, but I didn't want it to take effect until January. Okay? And if you look at the long sheet of paper, these are the terms of reference. Okay? And it says that to inquire into and examine and conduct research and consultations and make various recommendations related to the Lands Protection Act. And that 4 specific things right in the middle there. The first thing, it is the adequacy of existing aggregate land holdings limits given changes in agriculture, provincial land use, and ownership trends in rural communities. Options for reducing red tape and regulatory requirements while ensuring that the Act can be effectively administered and enforced. 3, legislative concerns that have arisen involving such issues as land holding limits as they apply to utilities, application thresholds as they apply to multiple owners, and the information and deeming requirements for nonprofit corporations. For any other matter the Commissioner deems appropriate to review and bring to the attention of Executive Council. Now, the Lands Protection Act was in some ways the end product of about 150 years of various laws in this province pertaining to land. And we all know that when we had significant British absentee landlords through a significant part of the 1800s, and when we entered Confederation, an agreement was made with the federal government that we were going to receive dollars in order to buy out some British landlords. And then through time, there were certain laws put in place. And one of the laws was that if you were alien of Canada or a foreigner, you couldn't buy more than 200 acres of land in Prince Edward Island without the approval of Cabinet. And then in the 50s and 60s, some of those things got changed. And then the amount of 200 was reduced significantly to 10 acres. And in the early 70s, in the Ali Campbell government, they got involved in the whole area of corporations. And when our government took over, Premier Angus MacLean, I was his Attorney General in that government, there were various things that he felt very strongly about. He was a very passionate man and felt very strongly about certain land. And one of the things that he did was he wanted to know who owned the company. Okay? And so an amendment was made to the Companies Act in this province that any company that was incorporated in Prince Edward Island, the shareholders had to be listed in Corporations Office. So if you happen to know the name of a company and it was incorporated in PI, then the information can be obtained. And it was in the past, you had to know the directors, but when he was Premier, we made the amendment that you know the shareholders as well. And there was a lot of talk in the late 70s here about people doing certain things with land, or there was some fear and so forth. And the legislative committee was set up on agriculture, and they had various hearings, and they made a report to the legislature around 1981 that recommended 18 recommendations. And then that was put into a statute. And one of the recommendations they made was that for the first time ever, that if you were a resident of the province, there was a limit on the amount of land that you could own. Okay? Up to that point in time, an individual could own as much as you wanted. But that committee, and this was put into the Lands Protection Act, 1,000 acres. In regards to a corporation, it didn't make any difference whether it was island-owned shareholders or off-island, that it was 3,000 acres, provided that you had 3 equal shareholders. Now, when it started off first, farming corporations didn't need to apply to get the ability to hold land. It just had to be something signed and stated that it was a farm corporation. And at 10 acres and 330 feet along the ocean, that's what a non-resident of Prince Edward Island could buy without getting a cabinet approval. Later on in the 80s, that was cut down to 5 acres and 165 feet along the water. Through time, in the 80s and 90s, and even more recently, there have been some significant amendments made to the Land Protection Act. A lot of provisions have changed over that period of time. And some people would argue that there's been too much red tape, there's too much bureaucracy, and so forth. One of the things that did happen in the 1998 session of the legislature, there was a purpose put in the act. And this is more or less when I'll conclude here, and I'll hear your comments, but I thought I'd just, in the 1998 session, this wasn't present in 1982. They added a section in the sheet that you have. The purpose of this act is to provide for the regulation of property rights in Prince Edward Island, especially the amount of land that may be held by a person or corporation. This act has been enacted in the recognition that Prince Edward Island faces singular challenges with regard to property rights as a result of several circumstances, including historical difficulties with absentee landowners and the consequent problems faced by the inhabitants of Prince Edward Island in governing their own affairs, both public and private. The problems of small land area and comparatively high population density unique among the provinces of Canada, and the fragile nature of the province's ecology, environment, and lands, and the resultant need for the exercise of prudent, balanced, and steadfast stewardship to ensure the protection of the province's ecology, environment, and lands. So that's the stated purpose. That's very rare. It's very rare to see something like that contained in a statute, because legislators take the position that we have already said in other sections what we mean. We don't need to come right out and say what the purpose is. There are several maps. There's one here It talks about non-resident ownership. There's one outside. And so I think perhaps I'll stop talking now, and we'll just see how the conversation goes. And there's a few other little things that I'll say as we go along. And so, comments, questions? What would people like to talk about?
What year did the regulation come in? Land, restricted land,
In 1982, Herb,
1982?
and that's when the Land Protection Act was enacted, in 1982. It was the first time there was a statute that dealt with the matter of land protection ownership in that particular regard. Previously, there was a little section in this statute and a little section in another section. The most important thing about 1982 was, for the first time, a maximum limit was put in the amount of land that any resident of Prince Edward Island could own. Now, I know I haven't been reading the journal that much, Tony, recently, but I know that looking at but I know looking at the Charlottetown Guardian and even national newspapers, who a resident is, and residency is a pretty topical, hot issue. But in the Lands Protection Act, it doesn't provide too much of a definition of what a resident is, except it's a person who lives in the province 183 days or more per year. It doesn't say consecutive, it's 183 days per year. That's when it comes to be a resident. So, like, for example, I have I actually only have 3 brothers now, but I'm the only one that lives in Prince Edward Island. The other 3 live outside the province. They are not residents of the province. And if they were to try to acquire land here or to buy it, they have to go through a process to get executive council approval. However, that didn't prohibit my late mother and my father a number of years ago deeding some land to my brothers, even though they were non-residents, because there is a provision in the Lands Protection Act that land can go from a parent to a child and grandchild and all that type of thing. There are various exemptions in that regard.
Another question related to that. Is that about the time that the Irvings, Cavendish Farm, took over the processing facility?
Well, I don't know the exact time that happened. As my recollection is that the history of processing in potatoes and vegetables in Prince Edward Island really goes back to, was it C.M. McLean on the Sherwood Road, and then there was a fire there, and I think it was perhaps a relocation. Was there something up in New Annan and so forth? But there was a lot of public attention. There was a lot of concern, a lot of questions being asked in the late 70s about what one sometimes here is called vertical integration, of where you have people in the processing business also out there actively cultivating lands.
I think, if I remember correctly, that's what initiated this regulation thing. Now, and it came from a certain group of people, more so than another, that they were afraid that Cavendish Farms, they were going to buy up so much land, they were going to grow their own potatoes for the processing plant, and there needed to be restrictions put in place. I'm pretty sure that's where it came from, the idea, okay? But it turned out that Cavendish Farms is the biggest employer on Prince Edward Island. Turns out that that they hire the most employees, and they reasonably paid employees. They're unionized, but they never come to a position where they shut the business down. That means there's a good relationship and a working relationship between employees and the Cavendish or the Irving company there. That's a plus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll just bring this up to you, and if I talk too much, anybody can shut me up.
Well, we've got a couple of hours, and I don't think we've got a large overflowing crowd.
Back then, I'm not sure just what year it was, but there was a local group of people built down the Western Road there, what do you call it, facility, potato holding facility, grading facility, packing facility.
Green Isle, was it?
Yeah. 3 acres.
Green Acres, that was called then. And unfortunately, they couldn't make it pay. They never brought it to the surface. And I had some pretty close relatives that lost a considerable amount of money in there. Okay. What I'm saying is, then there was a lady by the name of Mary Jean Irving, which is Robert's sister, and I know them personally very well. She went out and she bought a lot of land back of O'Leary Way. I'm not sure just what you call that district there. She made a beautiful job of cleaning it up, preparing the soil. It was beautiful land, and I don't know how much. More than that, she was the packing house where she was packing potatoes. I heard the employees say, "We love this. We love this. We never had it so good." What's so good about it? Well, one thing is you can cash your check the day you get it. But this regulation put her out of business, forced her to divest that land out there. Okay, so it is divided. I can't name the farmers, but it's divided up. And I don't figure that was the right thing to do. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I can change my mind, I can change my thinking. I probably sided in with those who thought that land regulation was necessary at that time. Okay. But, just a quick bit of history. I was born in November of 1930. My father was in First World War. That's his doings up there, that picture. I just happened to notice that. That ship there took the 105th Battalion up to Valcartier, Quebec, and that was her maiden voyage. Nevertheless, 1930s was the Depression years. I remember getting my first whole orange. I remember our clothes were made out of sugar bags, flour bags. Our mattress was straw, but we never went hungry. I'll just brag on that. We never went hungry. When spring came, we went on bare feet, not to wear any shoes. All right. I'm looking at a picture of what you call small and big. My father was a small farmer. Very limited income. Therefore, we didn't know what it was to have spending money in our pocket. 1944, he bought another place out to Hanley Road where we live now. Once again, that was a veteran, and his boys went away, and the farm had to be turned over. So we went on like that for quite a while. I'm pointing out a point here that I have to say, small is not beautiful anymore, if it ever was. All right? We used to say, Roscoe Barber, wish he's here tonight, but him and I agreed on the thing that big is not beautiful. Anyway, we lived on the farm, and in 1949 I decided I was 19 years old, and I said, I have to do better than this. I was getting $5 a week. I had a girlfriend. I moved away from home. 3 years later, I got a call that my father's health was deteriorating, and if I would consider coming back and on the farm. Well, I did that. I don't know yet whether it's the right thing or not, but I did come back on the farm. My pay increased 400%. Now, tell me how much I was getting this time. I was married now. And that time I got married. 400% when I went away. So what was I getting? What was he able to pay me, in other words?
I was listening to the story. I wasn't mentally doing any calculations.
Well, if I was
There's
getting
too many unknown
$5...
factors to figure that out.
Pardon?
There's too many unknown factors to figure that. We don't know what.
Well, I
X
said
and Y equal.
in my statement, I said that I was when I left home, I was getting $5 a week, and it increased 400%. Which means I was getting $20 a week when I moved home. A married man. You see, anybody with a thinking head at all knows that that's no good. See, now I'm not blaming it on my father. I only worked there for a year, and then I got out on my own, and I made a very good success in those years. As time went on again, he come and begged my brother and I to buy him out. In 1965, we bought him out. Our gross income that year was $7,000. Gross. I'm saying it is small, it's not beautiful. Never was. So we had to increase. We borrowed money, renovations. I had to build a piggery in order to finish in barn. We updated the other barns. We eventually went from 30 sows to 90 sows, fair to finish. And you know what? We made money. I was a member of the board of the hog commodity. We created a hog commodity board for Prince Edward Island, and we had regulations in that too. So the industry was good. We made good. We worked hard. We made good with the same land, but we went out and rented land, increased our base, and we paid for our bills, our loans, right up to par. And I was looking at some records today. We come up against it in 1998. Something happened. Somebody pulled the plug, and there was a reason for it, on the hog industry. We received, and for 4 years in a row, we received less than $1 for a kilogram of pork. That is the same figure as the farmers are getting 30 years prior. There was nothing done about it. What could be done about it? There was something wrong, though. They pulled the plug on it, on the industry. And as you all know, it cost Prince Edward Island the pork industry. There was a reason for it. The same thing happened to the beef industry. The millions of dollars have been invested in the beef facility, what do you call them? Infrastructures, for raising beef. There's millions of dollars and millions of dollars in our area. Anyway, something happened to beef. It's more important, you know what? It's more important to find out these facts than it is to regulate land. Because there's no farmer on earth can make money with 30 years prices. Now, I had 3 boys that ended up, after I brought my brother out, in 93, I brought my brother out. My boys began to come home and take a position at the farm. And ask Ivan, or any of them here, we're neighbors. Those are excellent guys. They're machinists, mechanics, welders, operators, managers, any name you put on them. And guess what? Our business of Pridham Brothers Limited was going down the tube so fast, we were going behind $40,000 a year. We lost our hog industry. There was nothing left. We had a contract for 5 million pounds of processing potatoes. We grew our own feed for the pigs. We had manure for the land. We were one of the most efficient farmers of any, and I'm not boasting, but the way we were set up. And yet, we were going behind $40,000 a year. Well, as me as the general manager, the president, I told them there's going to be something done about it. And you know what I did? I sold 3 farms. I paid off my debt. And I reserved 200 acres of prime property on the Kildare River. But I'm living debt-free. My boys, now here we go again. My boys had to go out west. 2 of them are out west there tonight, working out west. And the other one is into the trucking. By the way, he's pulling an Irving trailer, a Midland trailer. And he is very satisfied with the salary that he's getting. He's home, he does a 5-day work week. And he's home with his wife and his 2 girls. But he's getting probably 1/3 of what the boys are making out west. What I'm saying is, we were too small. At the end of the year, the end of the day, call it what you like, to write a paycheck. Okay? And as a result of that, I had to shut the business down. And today I'm renting my land. Other than growing a few acres of corn, yeah. It's not a pretty picture. But small, you see, is not beautiful. And I'm afraid, I'm somewhat afraid of big too, because if I don't know what you know about agriculture, but I do some reading. 2 years ago, I'm going to just say about 2 years ago, I was hearing about this monstrosity of a pig production unit out west. 2 years ago, it was stated that they owed $20 million. They were $20 million behind. 2 years later, which is just recently, a few months ago, they filed for bankruptcy protection. Now, they were allowed to produce so many hogs, and that's only one, there's a number of them out there. They were allowed to produce so many hogs that they were going to provide pork for the whole of Canada. And what happened? And this 208. What happened? Swine flu. Is that what you call it? Swine flu? They were not allowed to export a pig. The same thing happened to cattle when we got BSE. They weren't allowed to export cattle. Therefore, the price plummeted until we have empty barns all over the island. And we're suffering for it. So, what's the answer? Land regulation is not the answer. I'm gonna read you a few of the things that I wrote down. Regulating the amount of land that farmers or corporations can own would be equivalent to telling oil companies in Alberta you are allowed only so many sites, or restrict the number of employees. That'd be the same difference. After all, Alberta is some of the largest oil, one of the largest oil producers and our reserves. That's okay. But now, if I ask you tonight, what is PEI? What's our industry? What's our commodities? And what's our industry? Simple, one word: farming, land. And I believe in making the best of the land. I believe that if you restrict land, I'll tell you what we were doing. We weren't doing what we were supposed to be doing. You know, the government passed also an act there that you had it was a 3-year rotation thing, eh? Mm-hmm. Well, that's more regulations. Farmers don't like that, I guess. But what we were doing, we had pigs. We were using manure to keep our soil up to a good level, plowing down ryegrass. But we were in there with potatoes every second year. That's real bad. That's not good. Why were we doing it? Trying to get out enough product to write paychecks at the end of the day. So anyway, if we want PEI to reach its potential, is to maximize its potential. We have to maximize the potential. Agriculture is to PEI as oil to Alberta. Looking back to the landscape of PEI, I could see the farmers had faith in what they were doing. A new barn was more important than a new house. My own community, their faith let them down because their gross income was not enough to be able to write paychecks, and because of that, families had to leave the farm and look for a living elsewhere. As a result, those barns, and I'll take them, I'm speaking of my own community, those barns are falling down today. They were practically never used. In today's world, small is not beautiful. Times has changed. I wouldn't agree with that statement a few years ago, but not anymore. See, times are changing. My own situation in 19, and I told a story about leaving home, eh? I'll not read that. I told you about buying out my father in 1966. As a result of falling back for 5 years, much longer, our equity would be all used up, and another problem was interest rates were adding to our failure. I pleaded with our present premier before he got elected, and I voted for him. I explained our situation. And he said, what you're looking for, is a low interest loan. I said, that's exactly what we need. I said, we're getting consumed by interest rates. Okay? Anyway, I mentioned it here in these notes, that interest rates now, or we will have equity left, 3 boys' future on the way out. They had to leave home. 2 went to Alberta oil fields and others trucking. I told you that. Anyway, I had to sell these farms to pay off the debt, because I was getting real sassy letters from by the way, the Farm Credit Corporation. They tell my son, they said, don't worry about it. You're worth $3.some million. What's $340,000? That's what they were telling them. At the same time, they were sending the letters to me. You do something about it. What's your protocol? What's your plan of action? You've got so long. This is what I was getting, so I was fed up with it.
Herb, when you sold the farms, I don't need names, but were you selling them to other farmers, or were they going into agricultural use, or just what happened to your farms that you sold?
I sold them to other farmers in the area.
Yes.
Yes. And both of them are exceptionally good farmers. I wouldn't let them have the land if it wasn't.
Okay.
And they are doing a good job of it. He took one, and he was speaking about one piece of property there, and I was a little doubtful if that was a good piece of property for him or not. He said it's the biggest crop of potatoes he ever took off it. Why? I had seeded out when I sold it. They didn't need the hay, they plowed it down. Next year they didn't need the hay, so they plowed it down. They cut it off, plowed it down. And they got the biggest crop of potatoes they ever witnessed off of that ground. Now, I don't know whether I need to read these notes or not, because I got them pretty well in my head. By allowing farmers to own more land, enforce see to it that they got to go on a 3-year crop rotation. You'll have healthier soil. Okay, you'll have healthier soil. Production will on an acre land will gradually increase. I should have brought the figures to prove what I'm talking about in a magazine at home. This is in the west. No, it isn't. It's one of the states down in the south. Direct seeding was the pattern they use there. Someplace they turn it up, it'll dry out too much and it'll go away. So direct seeding. Pretty soon the yields were going down. And the organic matter was 1.2, something like that. It was ridiculous. Anyway, somebody come along and helped them out. Must be a specialist of some kind, told them what to do. Underseed with these different crops, and you'll change the situation around. They did what they were told. The last of it, their organic matter was up in the 5 range, which is extremely high. Their yields increased dramatically, which is very, very positive. And I said, that's it, I believe that wholeheartedly, but they got them on the right track. Now what I said was, if these farmers, these bigger farmers, they got to buy big machinery, they're going to produce a lot, they're going to need a big land base, because they're going to have to rotate their land. See, it's all right for them now to buy land at roughly $3,000 an acre here.
Is that the going rate in Alberton area?
It's
$3,000 for arable land?
This in the general area here, yeah.
It's $3,000 an acre.
Yeah. Yeah, but if they had to pay 7 to 10% interest on that, that's $300 a year, right? That's ridiculous. But they're getting it for about 1/3 that now, the interest on that. In other words, it's costing them $100 an acre for the interest, for the land. Anyway, you see where I'm coming from, do you?
Well, maybe what we would do is just take a little break there on that topic, if that's okay, and we will come back. Alan, I know that you were the first person to arrive, and you expressed interest in quieting titles, which is a very specialized law in this province that is there to perfect or make perfect a title that there are some problems with the title of the land, but you were explaining to me your concern that statute has perhaps produced the results that you didn't like.
Yes, it's being used to...
Can everybody hear Alan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
To quiet the title to access roads to the beaches in areas where people have traditionally gone down to the beach in their communities. but people from away usually, who come down here from New York State or New Jersey or somewhere and buy up quite a bit of land to put condos and that type of thing on. Don't want people down there on the beaches around them, they want privacy. So,
Sure, and I was explaining to you that, to me, there's a little part of this, the facts missing, okay? And like, I don't believe that the Quieting Titles Act, as I know it and have used it, can be used to close off a road. But you were explaining to me that what's happened is government in several instances has deemed a road down the beach no longer to be needed or necessary, to be surplus. And so what they've done then is then they've given half of it to one property owner and half to the other. But an example you were saying is that the chap owned it on both sides, so he ended up with it all.
that was the Arsenal Road out in Kildare. You know the one there that the witch guy closed off? But you guys both know it.
Now,
That had been there since the 1840s probably.
now what time, what you're just talking about out in Kildare there in the Arsenal Road, is that a recent occurrence or quite a few years ago?
10 years?
Yeah,
10 years?
10 years, yeah.
yeah, probably 10 years ago.
Okay. Now I can find this out, but I was of the opinion that in recent years government is much more reluctant to do that, and that they in fact want to make sure that old existing rights-of-way and roadways down to beaches be maintained and not closed off. There does get the whole issue of maintenance of the roadway and so forth, but I would be disappointed if the fact situation you recounted was able to happen today, but I may be wrong. I'd be surprised and disappointed if that was the case.
I think it still is able to, because it's only 3 years or 4 years ago that we had the episode here over the French Lane, and Norris attempts to quiet it for Westside. So, and it was quite a feud really to get to the end of that.
Well, the unfortunate situation, and you indicated the government did not step in there. Is that right?
No, they didn't.
Okay. And if government in a certain situation like that makes the decision not to be involved, that there are reasons for not being involved, even though you might disagree with it, then basically then what you have is you have one person over here that has this point of view, and you have this person or group over here with a different point of view. And when we live in a free and democratic society, if people aren't able to come to a reasonable opinion on something like that, then the only access is to the courts or violence. That's the heart and the nuts and the bolts of it. And just talking to you, I understood that there was an out-of-court settlement in that.
Well, first she put concrete blocks across the path, which people considered a danger.
It's usually a sign of troubles lies ahead.
Yes. And that became an issue and was in the papers and whatever, and they were removed because of their liability problems. And then it was settled out of court eventually between the town and West Tech.
Sure.
But it should not have happened in the first place because it was still a legitimate road on the map to be.
I've made this point a couple times. Karen is the only person that's been at another meeting, saying the meeting. It's O'Leary, but I've made this point a couple times, and I believe I made it in O'Leary as well. Without being critical of any government or without any party involved, if it would be possible for a period of time to have some access to the interest that has been spent to a service of debt, or some new funding was available, or say creative ways to even acquire some private funds to buy certain situations, so that the issue is gone. It's then in the public good or whatever. To me, that seems to be like, for example, I never knew him, but they called him Bobby Cotton, Robert L. Cotton. Okay, all right. Well, look at the fantastic amount of good that he and his estate did in many areas of the province.
Draft gardening in particular.
There's Draft Garden, and there's the Bunbury Nursery, and all of those different situations.
But that was that issue that was that issue this year as well, over the plan for they were going to go right across his land, and that came back to an issue of access to land, because in his donation of that land, the wording didn't say donated for a park. It said donated for the good of all islanders, or something very vague like that. And that became an issue at one point, if you recall, prior to Plan B.
Well, we're just going to leave Plan B tonight. That would be okay.
Yeah.
Now, we'll come back to you in case you have other comments you would like to make, and Karen will come back later. I'm going to skip you for a moment. I know that you're not shy in making your comments known, and we look forward to hearing them. Appreciate them the other day. I know Larry very much. Mr. Dunbar, do you have some thoughts you'd like to express?
No, I'm just taking it all in. I will ask the question, is there push to get the regulations of land-based increased? Is there a push on to either change them or increase them, or...
Well, let me answer it this way. There's certainly a point of view by some that would like to see it changed, okay? Herb has, in a very personal and articulate manner, has indicated why he thinks that there perhaps need to be some change, and yet at the same time, and before the evening is over, I want him to explain something, not right now, but I want him to explain his comments about I'm also afraid of the big two, that's something I want to have him talk about, okay? But perhaps we'll approach it like this, okay? Is that in the last year or so, the Federation of Agriculture has passed various resolutions wanting to see the limits increased. They want to see the 1,000-acre increased to 1,500, and they want to see the 3,000-acre corporation with 3 equal shareholders increased to 4,500. The National Farmers Union has taken a strong position, quote, we don't want any tinkering with the Lands Protection Act at all. And I have gone to meetings so far, these are where I've been, started off at the ADAPT Council in Charlottetown. About 100 different people came, paid $10 to have me make a few comments, and I listened to a lot of their questions and comments, and pretty varying points of view. A couple of weeks later, the Federation of Agriculture. Okay. And then in a couple of weeks' time, it's going to be the NFU. Tomorrow morning is the PI Crop and Soil Association. The other week, I'll talk about this before the evening's over, sat down with 10 or 11 young farmers, one female and the rest men. Actually, a very fascinating conversation about young farmers, and these people would be anywhere between maybe 24 and 32, 33. Just very interesting, their comments and their observations. But we are hearing from opinions a whole bunch of different people. No, we don't want to have any land limits increased. Then to those that want to have it, I wouldn't say wide open. I guess there are a couple that want it wide open, but certainly they'd like to see it increased by half of what the existing limits are. Now, where I've been so far, I've been to Vernon River. We had about 50 to 55 people there. Then after that went to Morel. And in Vernon River, very strongly held opinions every which way. Morel, equally the same thing. O'Leary, and We had to cancel in Crackle because of the weather. We went to Wellington. It was a terrible drive up, but when we got there, I thought it might be okay, but the power was shut off for 4 hours, so there were 3 people, and we had a little chat, and we all went home. And so then tonight in Alberton, tomorrow night in Summerside, the following night in Charlottetown. There'll probably be 2 meetings in Charlottetown. Okay. And I guess one of the things, and first of all, I don't have to defend the status quo. I was there, Premier McLean asked me to put it into place, the bill in the legislature, and I did that. In 1980, Premier McLean, the late Fred Driscoll, and myself, we were at the Constitutional Conference in Ottawa, and Prime Minister Trudeau was trying to bring the Constitution home. And one of the things he did was put a provision in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that any person could own any land anywhere in Canada. You didn't have to reside in Prince Edward Island. Well, we took a pretty strong position of that because we could see where a whole bunch of people from away who don't live here, don't participate in the community lifestyle, would be buying land and doing it without any real personal investment in that particular regard. And there was a significant debate on national television between myself and the Prime Minister on that point. And the long and the short of that was that he and I headed out, and not right then, but later on, there was a withdrawal by the federal government. And when the compromise came in November of 1981, that provision was taken out, and the Constitution came home without that provision in it. If that provision had been in it, there'd be no Lands Protection Act in 82. None whatsoever. A wide open season. Okay. And this is something that was in the Globe and Mail yesterday. I really didn't plan it. Bringing it tonight, I planned to scan it and send it to a couple of people that are working with me. But it's an article that was in yesterday's Globe and Mail in the business section talking about condos in New York. I don't know if anybody read it or not. But what it is that they are, this is the headline, international billionaires are forking over tens of millions for New York's latest in ultra high-end living as a hedge against uncertainty. And many are doing it without even seeing the properties. And 2 of the properties that have sold are condos in this complex, and 2 of them have sold for more than $90 million each. Okay. And I just make the point, that if our land in Prince Edward Island ever gets to the point where it's basically a public auction for the people who have the highest dollar, then what we have a situation very much unlike what Herb just described, which was, I wouldn't have sold my land unless I knew it was going to be cared for. Okay? And that becomes a minority point of view. Then what happens is land in Prince Edward Island is treated as if it was a stock on the New York or Toronto Stock Exchange, and people are buying it just exactly the same as those chaps are buying them in New York from all around the world. Now, just to make sure everybody knows, I don't own 1 square inch of land in Prince Edward Island. And I don't own a company with 1 square inch of Prince Edward Island. But my folks have been here since 1783 when we lost a little military skirmish south of the border, and we came up here. And my great-great-grandfather was a tenant farmer for over 50 years. And I'm the first carver in my side of the family since 1783 not to be a farmer. And I spent a significant period of time as the president and vice president, 15 years almost, 10 to 12 years plus, of the Prince Edward Island Beautification Society. And so I have a real affinity to rural Prince Edward Island. And I don't mind telling you that sometimes when I go home after some of these sessions, I don't know what our future is, because there are too many stories like the Herb Prince. Too many stories. But one thing that was uplifting for me last week is to meet with 10 or 12 young farmers who are not big, they're small. There's one fellow, I guess, a little bigger, a couple a little bigger. And I sort of wonder where they're going to be in 20 years' time. Where they're going to be in 30 years' time. Okay. And this is all our issues. These are all of us. But this guy here, he wouldn't be out of the hog business if people had ranted and raved and said, we want to pay Herb more money for pork. Okay?
Here. Yep.
But none of us did. None of us did. We go to a supermarket and we buy our whole bunch of pharmaceutical things and everything else. You look at your $15 or $20 and a $200 or $250 grocery bill, tax. That means you're buying a whole bunch of items that had nothing to do with agricultural products. Okay? And my wife, I'll say this because she's not here, but she says, and she's a nurse, so she's a retired nurse instructor in Halifax, taught at the IBK there, and she taught at school of nursing here for a long time. She would make the point of view that unless we start long overdue taking and caring for our farmers, pretty soon we're going to have to just survive by buying a pill, and the cost of the pill is going to be pretty expensive. Anyway, didn't mean to get on a rant. I suppose I'll read about this tomorrow, but that's okay. Anyway, so that's a long answer to what you're saying. But yes, there is a pressure to make that happen. There is, I need to tell you about a regulation change that happened. What's your first name?
Robbie?
Robbie. I need to tell you, Robbie, about a change that was made a couple of years ago. And that was the government said that if you have lands that are wet, that are steep, that you have hedgerows a certain way, or headlands, or buffer zones, or forests, that you can apply to have 40% of those lands up to a maximum of 40%. So 1,000 acres, you get 400 acres. On 3,000, it'd be 1,200 acres. I asked the question to the Federation of Agriculture for a show of hands of how many people felt they had those types of lands. About 35 or 40 hands went up. I asked them how many people have applied. Maybe 5 or 6. And the minister happened to be, Minister Sheridan was there. And I said, listen, Minister, you got a regulation's not working. But then the farmers told me that they don't want to do that because that means more bureaucrats, technocrats come onto their land, and they're afraid that they'll be charged for something they didn't intentionally do. So do you know what all that tells me, guys? We don't have the right level of trust that exists. You've been sitting here, but nodding your head. You're like a cheering section for Herb there. And that's okay, because he was going to say whatever he was going to say, whether you were here or not.
Well, we're neighbors. So.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good. Nice of a good neighbor.
Yeah.
Are you a farmer too?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you farm?
Well, I'm a dairy farmer, and I was a vegetable farmer.
Okay, what are those vegetables?
Everything from beans to potatoes to corn.
How long have you been doing that?
21 years.
Okay, really?
Last year.
Okay. So is your farming operation, Gary, is that an inherited situation, or?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
But the vegetables wouldn't be inherited.
No.
So how and why did you get it done?
Why did we get it?
Why did you get into the vegetables?
Oh, my wife had
urge to grow things.
Mm-hmm.
And she did a good job. I said that she was it was an impossible task, right in the middle of the best farming community in PEI. But she made it work. So last year, we're done now.
What about being done?
Yeah, we're all done with vegetables.
Are you? How come?
A tomato's just not priced right
So where did you sell your supply to?
at the road.
Oh, at the road. At the road for 21 years. And what do you sell? Tomatoes and beans and
Yeah.
carrots, potatoes, all that stuff?
Mhm.
And you made a reasonably good.
Yeah. So, anyhow.
How do you feel about not doing that any longer?
Well, she's not too happy.
Did economics determine at the end?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But although I'm like on Herbie's side of it, I can see that small is not pretty, like Herbie says.
Yeah.
But on the other side, what happens if we ever hit, like you remember, you were saying back in that paper there, that people are so uncertain that times are certain. You know?
What they do is
And financially, you know.
they buy the land
That's right.
just like a bar
So-
of gold.
That's right.
Future.
So what happens if we hit the 30s again? And there's only 5 people that own the land in West Prince. The other 1,000 or 18,000 people, where are they? Because there's only 5 of us with any food. You know, when that time comes, and it's coming, that paper says it right there. When that time comes, I'm telling you, if there's only 5 people on the land, I'm telling you, it's serious. That's what I'm scared of.
In some societies, when those types of situations happen, it usually produces violence.
Yeah.
Now, the difference that could well happen in here is that our Canadian society and their rule of law and respect for the person, also, that would be a pretty
That's
big
right.
stretch.
I agree, but the way you just said that, you know, the reason why they're playing this game is to win money, and it's so ramped up. $90 million for, you know, a few things are seriously ramped up, and this economy is sort of shaky.
You
So
think
you
so?
wonder. What?
I said, you think so, do you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I know you do.
There was you
Tony?
quoted a while ago, something you mentioned led you to believe that people don't have a high level of trust. You meant a high level of trust in government? Because of the red tape they would be subject to if they took their hedge land?
Well, I'm just saying that it was apparent to me when I was at the Federation of Agriculture meeting, when you had about 35 or 40 farmers indicate that they had lands that qualified for an exemption, and only about 15 or 20% of those people had applied, but it was apparent after I listened to them that they felt that they didn't want to have civil servants and government people on their properties and so forth. And so they have lots of examples, Tony, but to me it's a matter of trust. And it's a pretty important aspect of it. And you know, there's various observations that people make about rules and regulations, and you honor a rule and a regulation and a law by respecting it. And if you don't respect it, and you don't trust the people who put it there and how it's enforced, then you do several things. You ignore it, okay? Among other things.
Which leaves you losing the benefit at the same time.
Well,
the benefit of the law, if that law is in
I know.
place.
No, that's true. You lose the benefit, but some of them feel so strongly about it that they don't care. Let's talk a little bit about the Crop Rotation Act that Herb was talking about a moment ago. Okay. Don't think any of the public were at the meeting in Montague. This came up. So I asked for some assistance and clarification, the Crop Rotation Act. And John Jameson, who is the executive director of the Federation of Agriculture, he got up and said that it was his assessment that 75% of all farmers in Prince Edward Island were following the provisions of the Crop Rotation Act, the rotation 1 and 3 and so forth that Herb spoke about earlier. Okay. Well, 75%. And I got thinking about that on the way home, and that's, 75% is not bad. When we were in school, you tried for 100, but if you got 75% in the test, you felt pretty good, eh? As one local witch shouted out the other week, at least it was a pass. But then I got thinking about that a little bit more. And I'm saying to myself, if 75% of all the drivers in our road were over 0.08, or, like if they were under 0.08, my point, and 25% were over, that's not good. If 75% of all our drivers obeyed the speeding and 25% didn't, that's no good. And Karen's brother asked a very penetrating question at O'Leary the other day. I started off, I said, tell me what you want to talk about my little spiel, same as before, and tried to get them going. And her brother said, well, isn't the real question, what's the best thing for the land? Okay. Herb, I have a feeling you're going to say something, and then I'm going to Karen as soon as you say what you're going to say.
It's such a, well, it's like a problem, but it's not. They have to have, my argument is, the farmers is going to have the land base to produce enough product to make paychecks. Okay? But they also have to have that extra land there that's rotated. It just all works together. There's another thing that we have to consider here. And I listen to the news, I read a lot. For a farmer to produce a commodity, and he don't have a contract, he don't know where it's going, but I'm going to produce it anyway. Did you know that's about the situation right today?
Well, that sort of gets me to where your friend is here, is that he's a dairy farmer, and we have supply management in the dairy industry.
Yep.
Okay. Now, Ivan,
Yeah.
do you rotate your lands with other potato people in the area? Do you have, is that,
You know what? No,
you don't?
because I'll tell you why. Potato farmers are hard to deal with.
Okay.
You ask for a field of hay, and they want you to cut your hay even before it's grown. I mean, if you go to trade off hay, and then if you go to, they want land, and they burn it out with fertilizer, and so I give up.
All right. So, okay, but like I hear what Herb's saying, but to me, those components of the agricultural
right.
community,
Yeah.
they're doing well. We have supply management, right?
Yeah.
And we have that. Where do we have it? Well, we have it in poultry, right? Eggs.
Yeah.
And we have it in dairy.
Eggs.
Pardon me?
Eggs.
Eggs. Okay. And the farmers that are stably secure from one year to another year are in that category, right? Okay.
Right.
So, beyond that, isn't it sort of like a gamble?
Big time. Oh, yeah.
Big time gamble.
Okay.
And as I said there a while ago, the collapse of the hog industry and the beef industry, look where all Canadians ended up. They were forced out. And they had a good thing going. They were feeding the grain to the cows or the pigs, and then putting the manure back in the land. It's just a perfect, scenario. but they're forced out. And I was talking to the elevator the other day now. They're pushing soybeans, eh? And, you know, the people in government is not very smart, you know that.
I'm going to make no comment on that comment.
You're not in government.
I'm certainly not. My wife doesn't want me to go back.
But I'll be honest with you. I know these fellows you're naming off there. I've worked with them for years. I don't know how much they learned since I left there. I can't say that. But soybeans is one of your rotation crops. Anybody that would announce that and make that a legal situation, soybeans is something they do when they're all done planting the rest of the crop, right? Most of them don't put any fertilizer on, they just put them in the ground. It's a low-cost production thing. Well, when they're done with the soybean crop, there's no more organic material left in the soil there isn't that far. And yet that's a rotation crop. And I'm renting my land, and like you said, I only rent it to people I trust. But I might have a little problem if he wants to grow soybeans in my land. He's going to have a 4-year crop rotation.
Because it's still Herb's land.
Yeah, it's still my land.
Right?
Yes,
and
sir.
you still have some control.
Yeah.
And when you sell it, you lose the control.
Yep.
Karen, you came back from the O'Leary meeting, so you must have, I know you found the O'Leary meeting, the first part of it, whatever, but have you given some more thought about some of these matters and topics? Do you have some advice for us and observations and thoughts?
Well, I just find the entire topic very interesting. I'm very glad that you got appointed to this role because you seem like the perfect person for it.
There are some days I have to tell you, I sort of wonder why I submitted the application, to be quite truthful with you.
I wonder if you don't own a bit of land on Prince Edward Island. Do you have a health card?
Well, I just tell you,
That's Duffyism.
my family's been here since 1783. I'm the first non-farmer in our family, and I cannot tell you how much I enjoy. My wife has a half an acre of land in Charlottetown. We have a home, and I am out there as late as December putting tulips and daffodils and flowers. I can't wait to see what the spring produces. To me, it's like a resurrection to know what happened to something things can grow. And I just love to get outside of Charlottetown in the spring and the summer. We're so blessed. I'm deeply concerned about the future of our province. Deeply concerned. I don't know how many of you guys who are farmers are going to be able to hang in there. And I'm not just talking about the land. I'm also, this whole matter of water caring and stewardship and pretty basic stuff.
I would like to really congratulate Mr. Pridden for his long life of farming, raised a family, very committed, did well. You did talk about the crop rotation. You sounded like you think that should be enforced.
I believe in that wholeheartedly, especially now. I confess that we were not in a 3-year rotation for many years, but we were putting 180 acres, loaded it with manure, liquid manure, and seeded it with ryegrass, and I plowed ryegrass under that. I wanted, I'll take his name down there to come up, because he was going to talk to somebody, and I'll show him what we're putting down under there. That's a 2-year crop rotation, But now that the animals are gone, the manure is gone, and by the way, I bought over 20 loads, that's huge truckloads of manure to go on a 17-acre field of manure. Why did I do that? Because somebody wanted the hay. They needed the hay. Well, I said, you take the hay you return me manure, the dairy people. I farm like with a conviction. I'm robbing the land. I know the difference. I know when you're robbing the land.
And I have heard too from other farmers that growing soybeans robs the land of its nutrients.
Yeah. But we're forced into it, as they say. If we don't put out enough commodity at the margin of profit, okay, it's so small, and if we don't put enough, we can't write a paycheck. And that's exactly why my boys are not home on the farm and we're not farming.
Okay, okay, we're going to go back to that, Karen, because I don't want to rob you of time. I'm looking at the clock here. I can stay all night, doesn't bother me. And if necessary, I'll sleep in the Western Motel if they're still open. But anyway, because I want to come back to something you said here, but in the meantime, I want to hear what Karen you have to say more.
Are you sure?
I certainly do. I'd rather hear it here than hear it after in another setting.
I'm just wondering, with 75% of farmers practicing crop rotation,
Yeah.
and then I see this Action Committee for Sustainable Land Management, and there's 18 recommendations from that, where the Federation of Agriculture and the Government Department of Agriculture and Watershed Alliance and a whole slew of people met.
This is the other week in Charlottetown.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of their recommendations is that full compliance with the existing buffer zones be required. So I have a little problem with, if there's a Land Rotation Act, and there's a Watershed Watercourse Protection Act, and we're recommending that it be complied to.
Well, the whole purpose of any law or statute.
But it should go automatically understood that it would be.
You would think that a basic assumption
Like
would be
this
that.
recommendation coming from that committee.
Well, it's just like, why do we have RCMP officers to deal with speeding? In fact, when I was Attorney General, one of the things I had to do was come up here and meet members of the community and the RCMP, because they felt that there wasn't sufficiently good protection up here, and I had to listen to the people's concerns and tell the RCMP people, the people want better enforcement and protection in Alberton. Okay. Unfortunately, when we live in a society, Karen, in which there's more than us present, you and me, we're always going to have people that are going to want to do it their way and ignore the law and all this type of stuff. I guess I am sort of the question I haven't gotten to, but I'm going to raise it tonight, is that if crop rotation is important and essential to the process, and if people want to have additional increased land limits, then somewhere along the line, do you reward people with more land if a significant part of the individuals are not honoring the existing crop rotation? And then you get in this whole area that Herb's talking about, whether the rotation itself is even proper.
I don't know, do you reward the drivers who aren't over 0.8?
Well, there comes a limit. According to the driving, there's a limit about how fast for the safety of the public good, okay? Like I've asked this question a few times, but it doesn't seem to get very far, is that Horace Carver enjoys my life. Have had some sadnesses and have some good times. But I've been able to do that quite happily without owning any land in Prince Edward Island. But I'm deeply interested in what happens to our lands and has happened for a long time. Does Horace Carver, a non-farmer, need to have the right to own 1,000 acres of agricultural land in this province, or any type of land? Do I need that? Okay. Is there something magic in that figure 1,000?
1,000 acres would require, would allow, I should say, how many acres per is?
No, I understand the agriculture potato argument, but I'm saying if I have land and it's not being utilized in agricultural production, do I need to have 1,000 acres of land? Maybe I could survive with 800, knowing that I have the right to own 800 acres of land. I don't know.
That's debatable, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it is debatable, isn't it?
Referring to her, your notes there, that same committee now, they're taking a different look at it.
Oh, are they?
Yes. Now, I don't know whether it was Plan B that initiated the change of mind or not.
Sorry about that, I didn't bring it up.
But you see, last spring I had the environmental officer. I invited him to come, and I'll take you over all the farm, what crop is going on here and there. And he told me, well, give me credit, you're doing a great job. There was one little spot, he says, I'd like to go a little bit farther with so there's a little grain sold there and grass seed there, and fix that. But, you know, I like doing it that way. I don't have to worry if he says it's okay. But they discovered that those buffer zones are still not enough to keep the runoff from the brooks and the rivers. I just read this lately, within the last week, in the magazines. And what they're going to propose is ask the government if they would go along with offering to buy that section of land and take it out of production and pay the farmer for it.
So what do you think of that?
What do I think?
Yeah.
That's exactly what they should be doing.
Exactly.
I took our bank of trees. Now here I am talking again.
I
took our bank of,
anyway.
I saw over my lifetime, I've been kicking around for a long time, over the lifetime, I saw different growths of trees on the banks of the river. You know?
Yes.
Because we have, I think, 2 miles of the island probably of waterfront. And those generation of trees would crumble and succumb into the river. So now you're waiting for another, hopefully another will grow. This is your buffers, or your natural buffer. I saw this, and back at X number of years ago, my wife and I, we acquired 200 little trees like that. And we planted them down below the barns there, where it's beautiful scenery and everything there. But we wanted to protect that bank. We didn't want our farm here and water there. We wanted its buffer of trees in there. And you know what? We planted them there, and now they're 25 feet high. They're the prettiest things you ever saw. They come from a nursery, those trees. And what I can understand is, all these folks are getting paid for going around, and why aren't they taking these ideas back to government, and government says, look, we'll send some students out there and we plant those trees for you. Would you know? And we'll mark off that section if you would like for us to plant those trees out there. That's putting their mouth right.
I remember one time in Cabinet Herb, the people from the Department of Forestry come in, and Premier McLean was at the table, and they were saying how long it took for a tree to grow. And the Premier's response was, well, if it takes that long, don't you think you better get out there and start planting more than right away?
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
No, I don't go along with everything, but they're working on it.
Yeah. Now, Karen, what were some other thoughts that you have?
With the buffer zone regulations, I think farmers feel quite a bit that one rule doesn't fit all with the slope of the land. There may be places where you wouldn't need as much buffer zone. And it seems like those rules came out for the farmers with, I got this feeling in O'Leary that they didn't have much input into that. And they're not very happy about that. And that's where this distrust comes from, and that they don't like environment people on their land. It seems like we need to go back a step or two and try and fix that.
See, one of the things that I've tried to do here, I don't know if you look closely at long sheet of paper, but this is an inquiry under the Public Inquiries Act, whippy-do. And it's supposed to be, under the Public Inquiries Act, I can ask the local sheriff to compel people to come to these meetings. Yeah, that's right. I can subpoena persons and documents to come to all these meetings. You can treat it just like a court session. Okay? But that's not the way I want to do this. Okay? The way I want to do it was to have 14 meetings across the province. Get into the areas. I know the province reasonably well. Can't be a politician and run the number of elections I did. Not always did I win, but without understanding that there are different points of view in different parts of the province. And I want to have the type of setting that we have here tonight, even though they're only a small group, where we can have a conversation and we can listen. And I think one of the things that's happened is too many people have stopped listening to other people's points of view. That we've sort of become like a broken record. We know that the other person's going to say this, and then you're going to respond with this, or back and forth. But when we listen to each other and hear each other, we're all in this together. All of this together. And one of the things, and I said this in O'Leary, that I would like to have happen, I would like to see some resources made available, and it's under item 4, which is any other matter that I wish to bring to the attention. Are there some sensitive areas in this province, lands and certain settings and whatever, that we need to protect? And the best way of protecting them is to acquire them for the public good. Are there creative ways that we can encourage people with private funds to make some of these funds available that certain things can happen? I don't know. But between now and writing the report, we're sure as heck going to find out. Okay? Because things don't always stay the same. And sometimes you need to act sooner as opposed to later if we're trying to protect certain things.
So the Island Nature Trust does a bit of that, acquiring land.
Yeah, it does. And it does. They were close to 3,000 acres. They were a few years ago trying to get additional exemptions. The government of the day wasn't interested in, or to get exemptions rather, not additional, to get exemptions. The government of the day didn't want to do that. The current government put things in place that I talked about, the 40% rule earlier. So a lot of their lands would fit into that category, and so now they're much lower. But like for example, Karen, there was an article in the newspaper here maybe 4 weeks ago. Diane Griffin. She was a Lachlan, or McLaughlin from, a Lachlan I guess it was, from around Travelers Rest. I went to college with her. Wonderful person. Very much into nature and Deputy Minister of Environment and so forth. She was on the National Conservatory Council of Canada. And she wanted to, her group was to buy another island out here. You saw it in the paper, you know more. Yeah. Yeah, okay. And they lost the opportunity to buy one of these 6 or 7 properties in December because that particular donor of some money needed it to happen right away. Okay? So that was lost. Okay. And then there was a nice picture in the paper. She needed $15,000 to make this next thing happen. Now, if you lived through the period of time that Herb lived about, $15,000 is a lot of money. Today, it's not a lot of money unless you don't have it. If you don't have it, and you don't have a job, $15,000 is a lot of money. Okay, but here is another there that $15,000 will make this purchase. Make it happen. And the woman is pleading in the newspaper for people to send in donations. Okay? Seems strange.
Did it happen? Did she get it?
Knowing Diane, I suspect it did.
Yeah.
Knowing Diane, I suspect it did. Robbie, what type of, you're a farmer, are you?
We have a small beef operation, yeah.
Okay.
Of course, our income's never come solely from the farm. My father drove a school bus all his life.
Okay.
He farmed a little on the side. And
Is he still involved in the operation?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he's 70. He's retired from school busing, but we still have the cattle.
And so do you have some income off the farm as well?
Oh yes, all my income comes off the farm. I deliver oil, so of course farming affects me in the oil end more probably than indirectly, because I deliver a lot of diesel fuel to farmers. But
So are you the only person on the farming operation now?
yeah, used to be my family. Yeah, we have 50 cows, cow-calf operation. I know somebody mentioned to me when I started the oil, I was at it probably for 5 years, that you'll soon be going home to farm, give up the oil. And I said to them, I starved. And that's when I enjoy the farm, I enjoy it a lot, but it's just a sideline. No living to be made on a beef operation today.
Do you have children?
Yep.
Okay.
I have 2 girls, and yeah, my wife works also. But the farm is just the farm. Yeah. It's no income on our operation. Little income, but just as much expense.
But you, in order for you to continue doing that, there has to be a great personal sense of commitment or love or attachment, maybe.
I guess there has to be, or I wouldn't be doing it now, for sure.
Exactly.
I would have died quite a while ago.
Yeah. How old are you, Robert?
41. Yeah.
See, I'm, not to become too personal, I'm the oldest of 5 boys. My youngest brother died massive heart attack a year ago in Moncton, just like that. And my father, because my father's 94 soon, about 30 years ago, he said all the sons are living off the island except Horace, and he's a lawyer, and he doesn't want to farm. And so my dad scaled back to just not go into debt, and keep a few animals, rent out some land, and so forth. And it's the thing that I always was amazed when I was on the farm is that it was such a gamble. You know, you could work so hard and you do the very best. You care for your animals, you care for your crops, and then it was some of the other foreign factors involved.
I was thinking that one of the issues that Kevin mentioned is the loss of topsoil because of the lack of the manure that Bert was talking about.
Haven't mentioned tonight, but it's actually one of the things that I'm becoming increasingly apparent of, Alan.
We went down to Charlottetown one day about 2 weeks ago, I guess, and all the way down, it's where you're in the Sahara Desert, really, because so many farmers, potato farmers in particular, had not planted winter wheat or anything in the soil. Just left it open, and it was so windy.
Well, when my wife and I came up the other week to O'Leary,
Yeah.
a meeting, as we drove from Summerside, there were a lot on the right-hand side of the road that were like that, and so forth.
Little dunes, like they had been snowbanks, but they were covered with the topsoil. Our topsoil is so thin that it just makes you wonder how long that can actually continue to happen. And the bigger the farms get, the more it seems to happen, because they don't have time to plant winter wheat or anything to hold the soil for the winter. We were down one time, I think it's 2 years ago now, down around Park Corner and sea view when it was an extremely windy day and there was nothing over the fields, and most of the fields were bare, they hadn't had anything planted in them. And the sky itself was almost purple with the amount of particulate that was in the sky and heading toward the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So it makes you wonder how much of our actual good topsoil has gone out to sea, really.
Well, I told you earlier, I spent about 12 or 13 years living in a cottage 1,000 feet from the ocean there in Seaview, and the amount of erosion is quite phenomenal along there.
Yeah.
Now, are people, you know, there are 5 of you here tonight. Are people talking about any of this, or are you surprised there are only 5 people? This is the smallest attendance we have. I don't think they're all at the Rod Royalty Charlottetown Cairn. I'll find out tomorrow morning. Maybe they're 500 and they all are wearing Western Capital uniforms or something. But are you surprised that more people haven't come? Are there chit-chats? I mean, are you people talking about this? You 5 came out tonight. Are you speaking to friends and neighbors? Okay, what are comments being said? You know, like they would say that's hearsay in law, but I'd say it's pretty good hearsay.
What's the coffee shop?
Yeah, what's the coffee shop?
Well, they knew it was happening, definitely some of them. But they're not into meetings, was the answer I guess when I asked if they were going.
Oh, this is a pretty tough meeting tonight.
Oh, that's extreme. Yeah.
We may have to change with the times regarding this here erosion of soil.
Mm-hmm.
That's been going on for a few years, but the reason for it is, in my day, I spent 5 years or 6 years plowing snow. Way back then, we didn't have any blowers.
Are you talking on the roads?
Yes, on the roads. I was working for the government, and then I was a private contractor. And anyway, we're going over this. There's a road out here in Caskenbeck, which was really bad for catching snow. But since then, of course, they did something to the road, and they're a little higher, and they don't catch quite as much. But I pounded a road through there one day, and there were 17-foot banks on each side of me. Now, what I'm saying is, then when I was a kid, we'd coast off the barn roof. There was so much snow, but coast off the barn roof, climb up to the peak, and away we go. Over the recent years, you know, climate change has taken its toll. Our fields are left bare. There's just a little bit of snow on them out there right now, and another day or two, that's going to be gone. And we get a hard frost on that. It dries out so severely, and a bit of wind, and it's gone. I mean, maybe farmers can change their practices. And I'm reading also of the same group here suggesting, and I think it's the Federation of Agriculture down in Charlottetown, talking about spring plowing. And if they pass that legislation, spring plowing, that's the end of the farmers.
Why would it end?
Well, you can't plow any volume in the spring. I leave it a hilly field or something like that. But because the soil is so mellow, so soft, it's not packed down, and you whatever you put on there, you're burying it. You've got to be more prudent than that when you're out planting. I read an article on soybeans, 1.5 inches maximum. But when these spring plowed fields are so soft, the soil is not yet settled down. Okay? And if they bring that in, I mean, it's going to be a disaster.
I think the thing that's worrying the most people is, as you all know, sand is quite corrosive, right? When it's blowing around at 100-kilometer winds and whatever. And the damage being done to houses and buildings is quite intense when these winds are on and the air is full of sand blowing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, do you have any comments on that? type of thing, like the corrosive nature, like for instance after that last windstorm, if you went out here to Ellensdale and Rosebank and Bloomfield, almost every house had a bank of sand
Yes.
on the front porch and more on the roof. And
Well, I guess the comment I have, Alan, is that when I spoke in my debate with the Prime Minister, which was all off the cuff in 1980, I was here, and Premier McLean was here, and then Premier Lougheed was here, sort of like a round table like this. And I made the observation that if we properly cared for the top 15 inches of our topsoil, it would be renewable forever, and that someday the oil fields of Alberta would be dried up. So in one of my public meetings so far, I made that statement, and I was corrected by saying that we don't have 15 inches any longer.
Only 7.
That it's reduced significantly.
7.
And I'm, this has been quite a learning process for me. I'm hearing the word that's applied to topsoil as being thin, and then learning some of the stuff that you folks are saying, as others have, about the animals and the livestock and things like that.
When you're talking about the West,
Yes.
I long remember when they didn't use fertilizer to go on the crops. And when they wanted a little better soil, plowed down a little deeper. And there just seemed to be no end of that beautiful topsoil. It was a riverbed one time, right? But now they're using fertilizer now.
Okay. Another issue that you didn't bring up was the current negotiations between the federal government and the EU over having free trade between them, and one of the issues on the table is the doing away with supply management for dairy cows and poultry in Canada.
Well, Alan, there's a lot of things I didn't bring up. I think that's one thing I'm not going to bring up. I'm going to leave alone. But let me tell you, if I might, and there's something else people want to say, please. But let me tell you a little about my meeting last week with these 10 or 11 young farmers. Okay? Well, first of all, there was a young farmer there from Holland. He's about 25. His family had sold their operation, organic farming, in Holland, and they sold it to come to Canada. His parents stayed over there, but he came over here, and father comes over every so often. And they sold it because they were living in the municipal area, and the municipality wanted their farm to have it as a protected green space. So this young man, when the family was talking about coming here, he did his undergraduate degree in what? His thesis was, quote, organic farming in Prince Edward Island. Okay? I'm pretty impressed. Okay. There was a husband and wife. They brought their young daughter along, Olivia. I don't know how old she was, 6 or 7. These young farmers gave me a gift, but I gave the gift to Olivia without even opening it. I'm not accepting gifts and not accepting free lunches either in these travels. This is a young couple, and Ivan, what they're into is organic vegetables. Okay?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons they came here was because the setting, the soil, and the smallness, and all of that type of stuff. Then there was a young man, husband and wife. She wasn't there, but he was obviously he talked about beef and steers and that type of stuff. Then there was a young man who would be about 25, I would say, and he's into corn and soybeans and things like that, but he's not in it with his parents. He is in with a couple of people a little older, and he's in there, and he's expressing the problem that he can't get enough land to do crop rotation. He's having some problems leasing land because he really can't afford to buy land. He's having some problems finding out who actually owns the land, because some of them are non-residents and so forth. And then there were 3 or 4 other gentlemen that are obviously, I would say, successors to family, environment, and so forth. And I think the thing that impressed me most, they meet regularly. This was a canceled meeting because of a storm, and they only had 10. Normally they have 20, they said. But I was impressed that here were a dozen people that were putting their energy and long-term future into this, and some of them had real legitimate concerns. Okay? And one of the chief concerns they had was they said, we think it's time for the government to get back into the area of land banking. We can't afford to buy a farm, but the government can afford to buy Herb Pridham's farm, and then we can lease it long-term from them. Okay? Government. There are a number of examples given. And somewhere along the line, I and others need to listen to these young men and women we need to listen to people who are prepared to put their future. These were all bright young people. They could do a whole bunch of other things other than farming. But they're courageous. They feel passionate. At some point in time, some of them were talking about wanting the limits raised and so forth. So then I decided to see what would happen when I tossed this question out, the Peter Bolger question, which is, so what's good for the land when you want to raise the limits or do this? Well, it stopped them in their tracks, and they started thinking about, what is good for the land? And they started talking back and forth. And it was a really interesting conversation. We didn't have any media present, but I just came away from there and saying, you know what? I wish we had 100 of you. Okay? But at some point in time, they're going to be like Robbie, because they're not going to be able to make it there. They're going to have to find the oil truck or the school bus. They're going to be like Ivan's wife. What's your wife's name? Teresa? Yeah. Okay. I have a great affinity for Teresa. I never even met her. Because the part of the farm that I loved the most was helping my mother with her market garden, and my grandmother with other aspects of it. Not the mechanical, didn't like that, although I knew how to milk a cow. Okay. And the little niches that some people have been able to develop. My mother developed a niche in, I'm going to say zucchini. Not the big ones, the little tiny ones that some of our ethnic fellow citizens like to hollow out into stuff. I could see 4 or 5 cars in our yard a number of nights because they were out there wanting the small ones and stuffing and so forth. And, anything to make $1, to make it whatever.
I think there's going to be a lot of people now who are quite taken back by Teresa closing it. Yeah. Because in my wife's case, she has given up growing vegetables because she said, I can always get them out of Teresa's, and there's at least another 20 that do the same. They have given up trying to grow because of the bugs and stuff. We just can't keep ahead of them. And we don't grow any vegetables anyway. We just buy them from you folks. So if you guys are giving up, we're in trouble.
If we are not there for those young people,
and
Mr. Pridham's sons have gone out west, I know a lot of farmers whose sons are not continuing with farming. Those are Prince Edward Island boys who have seen the hardship and don't want to go there. So we've got these ambitious people coming from Holland and wherever. We're going to need them to keep on farming this island if it's going to be the garden province.
No question. No question. Absolutely no question. Herb?
Well, I want to ask a question though. If you did your homework, how many immigrants landed in Prince Edward Island, they say back 10, 15 years ago, and how many of the immigrants is still on island soil?
Do you mean the Holland farmers that
Pretty
came
well.
here genuinely planning to farm, or do you mean the PNP people or
No, I mean, they're,
the
you
ones
know,
that came planning to farm?
they came here, well, they get here with, it's your P and B thing, don't get on that.
No, not
That's
this.
another.
Eric, get us off that,
They
eh?
came here, you know what I mean? And the thing wasn't done right, they were supposed to be part of the company and so on and so forth, where the money made.
Yeah, we're not gonna go there.
We're not getting into that. But my understanding, what I'm hearing is, they only get here long enough to get their feet down and get their legal papers, and they're gone where the money is.
You're talking the immigrants that
Yes.
are not farming.
And
But
they're
the
talking
ones that
about
came
bringing
from
in-
Holland and other places that
They've
really
stayed.
came planning to farm.
Well, you know yourself, you should know yourself, that there's no organic farmer can possibly survive.
Well, not necessarily organic farming that they came to do.
Well, yeah.
Dairy farming.
Now, there are some Dutch people come over here, and I knew them well. They had the money, somehow or another, they had a barrel of money when they came here. And Ivan, you might be able to tell me, you're a dairyman, but they went into the dairy industry, and they're doing very well. Why? They come here and set up under an umbrella.
Not the
Quota
ones,
system.
not the ones that I know.
Actually, in my opinion, the ones that come here, right, they had probably $4 million.
Yes.
They're tax exempt from our own government. Then they were competing against their own boys that had tried it. Okay, I can name different farmers that want to farm, and they couldn't get the equity that they got, and they actually put our own dairy farmers out of business.
Yeah.
Now, I could be wrong, but they'd be wrong. State me if I'm right or not.
So coming forward to today,
Yeah, right.
where our boys are all going out west,
Right.
and it's very difficult to get ahead in farming on Prince Edward Island today,
Yes.
what would you recommend for these young farmers that come?
Oh, I'm awful scared about those farmers that are those young farmers.
What can we do to
I'm
keep
awful
those young
scared that
farmers?
if there's one of them left in 10 years, I'll be pretty surprised.
Can I go over just quickly?
Maybe
Yes.
Some-
Please, I think there'll be several of the 10 left for sure.
Oh, it's good, but I'm just,
So if they're gone and our owner's still gone out west, there's no farmers.
trying to.
Well, you get back to my wife's story about the pill.
Yes.
See, it all has to do with basically the land use, because if we don't have the laborers, the land won't be used. And we don't want that. I talked with a fisherman from Tignish. He had a dragger boat, a big dragger. It was parked out there, and I hadn't talked to him for quite a while. I said, "You're not out fishing?" "No." He said, "I'm out west." See, they do a line on that type of fishing, no more dragging. He says, "I'm out west." He had steep payments, and he had to go somewhere to make the money to meet his payments. And I said, "Well, what's it like out there?" Well, he says, "I'll tell you what, put it this way. There's 90% of them, if it is possible for them to leave there and come back home, they'd be here. But 90% of them are out there because they have to be out there. I got 2 boys myself. They had mortgage homes. They want to educate the children. They want to put a little money away for retirement. That kind of money's not here."
Do they want to come back here eventually?
Oh, yes.
I wonder how they
90% of
picture,
them don't
what
want
if
to
they
be
get
out
back
there.
here and Prince Edward Island isn't the way it was when they left. It's those condos, those people from New York that came in and bought up the place. They'd be surprised.
Yes.
Al, I just get a question here. Well, you mentioned earlier coffee shop talk. People knew about the meeting tonight. They weren't interested in meetings anymore. How come?
I don't know.
Turning people off meetings. This used to be kind of a meeting mecca place.
It was at one time.
If there was a meeting, it was someplace to go, something to do. How come it's not like that?
This is the size of the last meeting I was at here too.
What's turning people away?
That meeting was on subdividing farmland into places for apartment buildings. And there was hardly anybody here that night either. Like the land in behind us here, which was at one time a racetrack, but before that was farmland. And the land, the Levitt property on the other side. There was a public meeting here about that too, but there was only a handful of people. Same size as this. I think people just aren't interested in meetings. You know?
Well, we're certainly getting lots of comments.
I wonder, are they losing trust in what the meetings are accomplishing, or are the meetings accomplishing anything, in your opinion?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have an opinion on that.
I think you could be front page story tomorrow.
No, I don't want to be. Don't have any opinion on that.
Herb, can you wind it up for us?
Well, I have a little more time now to run around and take notes. I went to a farmer, in fact, he's related to me, maybe I'll offer. I went up there last fall to see how he's getting along digging. He's getting old now, he's 70-something years old. And, well, they're cold and dark and bad weather. But regardless, I said, how you doing? Oh, well, he says, we're getting there. Hard to get help. Don't know what we're going to do another year. That was the story. That's how bad it is. He has one son. He's out west, and two or three of his boys. Right off the farm. The potential help for Billy Oliver, it would be his grandsons, his son and his grandson, they left the farm, and they're gone. So, and I went to the field to see how things are going out there, and I'm pretty sure, I could almost swear, that every one of these truck drivers in the field were over 70 years old. So we got a real problem here, okay? But I drew up a sketch of a little picture of what could happen to it, all related to the farm and the farmland. They don't want to be out there. They don't expect to earn $100,000 or $150,000 a year. Okay? They just want a livable allowance. And they'll stay here. How is it going to be done? You contact these farmers that are getting big now, and they need the help. If they're going to gain a lot of land base, they're going to need the help. My plan is that the farmer sits down with government and they say, yes, we want these number for 7 months. And also, we pay them margin above the minimum wage, not the minimum wage. Okay, we want them around. But come winter, when the farmer's hands and legs are tied, they have to go on unemployment. It's seasonal work. But there's a pay period in there that they don't receive anything, and they can't afford that. So this is where government comes in. Okay.
One of the things, Herb, that I'm hearing from certain quarters is that some of the farmers, perhaps larger farmers, because they have good help for part of the year, have looked at their operation to see if they can't provide year-round work for some of these individuals because they value their services so much in the farming, because they don't want to lose them. They're afraid that they can't provide good help, that they will be gone to Alberta or elsewhere. But that doesn't apply to all farming operations, I'm sure.
No, now that they're gone out of livestock,
yeah.
There's not cattle and pigs and all that stuff to take care of. It's a seasonal workforce that we're dealing with here. And some people in Ottawa don't know that yet. But there's nothing they can do. But what I say is, what the farmer hires them for and guarantees them, it's a set figure. The government comes in between there when they have that 2 or 3 waiting period, however long, 2 or 3 weeks is it, and then they're on unemployment until he gets back with the farmer again. He's going to be there for the farmer, and it will be a class of dedicated people who do not want to leave their families and go out west, as long as they get enough money, a salary, And I'll guarantee it wouldn't be very attractive to you.
I don't think the changes in the EI doesn't allow for that, though, does it? Like, that's one of the issues right now. The changes in the EI.
I think I'm going to say that that's a federal responsibility tonight. And
Yeah.
Gail Shea is your member of parliament, and
Yeah.
she's charged of national revenue, and I think whatever.
That is true.
Changing the subject.
It's to an issue.
Sorry.
Yes, no, go right ahead.
These areas of at-risk land that the government might buy up of wetlands and buffer zones.
They don't know that they're really buying them up.
No, if they did, and I'm looking at the map, it would look like a very patchwork area that, and so all around the shore would be government owned, and in the middle where there are wetlands,
Well, I talked
would the farmer's land be all chopped up? The government owns this little spot, I own that spot.
Well, I talked to one of the members of the committee that made the report public the other day, and it's something I personally agree with. He was telling me their task force said, well, if this is a troublesome area, let's just recommend that the government put so many dollars or whatever to buy it, take it out of being perpetually troubled all the time. You talk about Seaview. That's a community that I know quite well, and first went there in '79. I've seen what's happened to the streetscape and things like this.
So it would be a major job to re-deed all of that.
Well, what you do is, just to take the community of Seaview in that area for an example, Marion Reed, who's a good friend of mine, she's the honorary chair of the Lucy Maud Montgomery Trust. They've taken about a 20-foot strip of land, a 20-mile area there, Karen, and they're trying to go out and buy properties and to buy the developmental rights so that they can stop try to prohibit all these cottages appearing and taking streetscapes and all of that type of stuff. And what that does, it enables a farmer to get some cash. And the farmer then agrees not to develop this particular section of land. They can still farm it and so forth. I personally think that there's a lot to be said for the matter of scenic views and landscapes and so forth. I said it publicly when media were present before, but I think it's fair to say that the word landscape is going to appear in Horace Carver's report one way or the other, even if it comes under category 4. And somewhere along the line, people have to realize, to quote my old late friend, Premier McLean, and he and I were great friends. I was his seatmate all the time he was in the legislature. When he was Premier, is that some things in life are so valuable that they're priceless. And we're not always going to have the opportunity to acquire them. We're not always going to have the opportunity to acquire these things. And sometimes if people provide leadership in this area, it might be amazing what some people would do themselves if they felt that the Bobby Cottons of the world weren't the only ones out there doing certain things. If they knew that the word trust, like the Bobby Cotton Memorial Trust, truly meant something to do certain things. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble and so forth. But I guess what I would like to do is do a couple of things right now. One is to say I dashed home to put a more casual attire on, and instead of doing that, I didn't grab my calling cards to pass them out so that you can send any comments you would like to have in. But Patrick has his, and so the same address, just slip my name on it or even put his name on it. And there's enough here that you might even find one or two that you can give to some of your friends that don't like coming to a meeting. And be sure and tell them it was a pretty pretty tough meeting,
It was a lively meeting.
Live meeting, and all that type of stuff. But I learned a long time ago in politics. I used to travel the roads up around this area a little bit. Is that sometimes the best meetings can be the smallest meetings. There's nothing wrong with having big meetings, but I can tell you it takes more work for me to try to get sort of the flow and conversation happening. And I don't know what you think about the meeting, but I'm quite pleased with your comments. I'm going to give you these cards and hope that I'll see some of your comments. And don't send me a letter, a note, whatever. And Herb, you've spent a lot of time putting some thoughts on paper there tonight. I hope you feel you've had the opportunity to explain them. If you feel you haven't, send me a note. And whatever, be pleased. And that applies to everybody else as well. I only single Herb out because I know that he's a scribbler there making notes. All right?
Could I add something before you bring it to a close?
Sure.
This just came up recently, like Ridge Porter, you probably know Ridge.
I know Ridge Porter.
A friend of mine down east. He got quite a shock one morning when he got up, you probably saw it in the Guardian as well, that a company from Indiana had just purchased all the land behind him down to the shore, and had purchased quite a bit of the other land in southeast PEI there, and was turning it into potato land.
Well,
and so I'm just wondering if you have any idea how much land this competition from Indiana has at the moment.
Well, I don't know how much land that particular company from Indiana has, but if you look...
The one that's out in the hallway is more of it on it.
This is the map, and you can pass the little takeaway map. Okay? And there's about 1.2 or 1.3 million acres of land in Prince Edward Island. Not all of it's arable. And the blue is non-resident coastal properties on here. And you were talking, there's a heavy proportion up around here, Point where my mother came from, Marine Harbor, down around that area. And then non-resident inland properties. So there's more inland property than you would think. Okay. So we have 132,500 acres of non-resident owned land in Prince Edward Island, or about 10% of the total land area is owned by non-residents. Okay? But it all combats what's a non-resident, like there may be people from Indiana coming, there could be, like my brothers own some land here that they inherited. Okay? There were over 16,000 non-resident owned properties, that means parcels of land, of which 3,600 border the coastline. So 13% of all properties on Prince Edward Island are non-resident owned. One of the things that has surprised me about these meetings so far is how little attention has been devoted to this particular map, even though we passed them out. I'm actually quite amazed how these issues of non-resident ownership have had such little discussion in these public meetings. Okay. And what you're talking about with your friend Mr. Porter there, about a company from Indiana, well, that is really a whole bunch of things that get into it. First of all, it didn't happen overnight. Second of all, because it was corporation had to go through Iraq, it would have had to be made available to the public here in Prince Edward Island for quite some time, to the guidelines for public advertisement. So at somewhere along the line, what happened was that the island vendor, just make sure that whatever picture you use, don't have my notes wide open, please.
I thought maybe the camera froze all of a sudden and went moving.
I don't mind whether I have no smile, I just don't want my notes wide open. Okay. But one of the things that really gets to the heart of this is the other side of the coin. And the other side of that coin is simply this, guys. is the farmer or the island resident has put all of their effort and energy into their land investment. And at some point in time, it's time to sell.
Mm.
It's their retirement.
It's their retirement. It's their RSP. Okay? Not to be repeated, but my father never had an RSP. What he had was his land. Okay? And so, if he sets a price at it, it mightn't be what Reg Porter wants to pay, but this group from Indiana, they're prepared to pay it. Okay? So, that's a tough question. It really is. And sometimes those of us who aren't that directly involved in it, we have lots of thoughts and observation what somebody else who owns the land, what they should do with their land.
Oh, yeah.
But my point to a certain extent is we have to come up with creative ideas how to make it possible so that these individuals receive benefits for having been property owners of PI, and that maybe there are opportunities here for government and non-government to acquire some of these lands, since our province has so little public land. Okay, let's go to this. This is the other hand that we have here. Printed on corporate properties. But we got to be careful we don't get so hung up in this word, okay? It's like a dirty word. Well, basically what happened is most farming situations, perhaps not all of them, certainly not all, but a lot of them are incorporated for a couple of reasons. Their accountants advise them to get incorporated for tax reasons. Okay? And if we've got a lawyer involved, like I would be, I'd encourage them to be incorporated for liability reasons. Just like a church should be incorporated for liability reasons. So, a lot of this relates to family farm operations that have got 2 or 3 shareholders. Over 26,000 corporately owned properties in Prince Edward, which account for 455,000 acres, or about a third of the province's land area. But when you take in consideration that 1.2, 1.3 is the total land area, and then we're looking at the arable land, and this starts to be much more significant in volume. Okay? And of that, just so it works out this way, 2,600 of all these corporate properties are non-resident owned. Okay? This accounts for over 27,000 acres. And we have seen this go up and down a little bit, the non-resident corporate. There were several large firms down around here. Dundas Farms and Henderson Lumber Mill. They were non-resident. When they went out, then the numbers went down. Okay? And one of the things that needs to happen, and hasn't happened in recent times, is that the Island Regulatory Appeals Commission has not determined that it's necessary to keep on doing certain reports and analysis and so forth. So it's a little gated what we have in some of this stuff. Okay? And I don't think that we need to be looking and seeing ghosts and shadows every place. But I am a little surprised and disappointed that so far there has been so little discussion about this type of stuff at public meetings, because it's important and it relates to some of the stuff that you're talking about, okay? It really does. And anyway, I think, Patrick, is this our 5th meeting we're at?
Yes.
Okay, and so we have something, we're not halfway point yet, and we'll see what happens. But anyway, as you know, I know I should have said this as a caveat earlier on, you can't take too much from some of the questions I've asked, although tonight I've decided to let you see 1 or 2 points of view that I do personally hold, and will creep the way into the report a little bit. But this stuff is important. It really is. And it's you people that I need to hear from. Okay? And send me your comments.
One thing up this way that has happened, and I think it has in the Seaview area and down east, it definitely has.
Yeah.
When non-residents buy a property on the shore,
Yes.
and then they, for one reason or others, try to sell it, it's always way high priced and much higher than locals could ever afford.
Well,
So it ends up being sold again to
that gets back to some of the stuff I was talking about earlier. But the other thing is, I can tell you that to take a little slightly different bent to that, Alan, and I hear what you're saying, is that I am absolutely staggered by the number of non-residents who come here and who have such an affinity for our way of life and our lifestyle and how they relate to us and have the sense of pride they have in our place. There was a study just recently done by the Tourism Center at the university that talked about the importance of what it is. And one of the chief things has to do with the pastoral, agricultural, rural setting that brings them here. The other thing that happens is that if these non-residents, like for example, I had a client that purely accidental how I got them, but it doesn't make any difference. They came here in their late 30s on holiday and bought a little piece of land up around here, built a cottage. They're now well into their late 70s, okay? And they just recently transferred into a family trust because their family wants to keep it in the family forever and they want to know that it's also like that, okay? And you have some people like that, but then you have some non-residents that have come occasionally, but they've never built on it. And when they die, 9 times out of 10, their kids don't want the property because they never came, they never lived in it, never felt it, okay? And so it's quite interesting, you know, this flow back and forth between the Boston states, there's more truth to that than whatever. Anyway, I apologize, I'm starting it off on a whatever, I gotta stop.
I got a question on that. All these non-residents and the amount of real estate they own, I made a note here, are they paying double the...
Double taxation.
They're paying double taxation?
Double taxation. Now you have to, and what I'm next going to say has application to various things. They pay double taxation. Whether you're a resident, whether your job is in the center of Canada or otherwise, they pay double taxation.
That's a toughie, isn't it?
Yeah. But, you know, sometimes people come to lawyers and they say, I just call them and I want you to provide options and choices how I can legally avoid this, okay? Not evade it, avoid it, all right? And then other people criticize, oh, that's a loophole. Well, quite frankly, it all depends who's doing the asking. It all depends who's doing the asking. But for example, the question was posed to me at the Federation of Agriculture. A woman posed the question. She was offended by the fact that she cannot deed a piece of Prince Edward Island to her child who no longer lives here. I said, you can. You don't have to go through government regulation. At the present time, there's an exception that sometimes has been slightly abused, or has been used in a manner other than what the intent was. You just deed it to them because they're your child. And so then the woman comes back to me and she says, well, they pay double taxation. And I say, that's true, but when you deed it to your child, if you retain a life interest in the property and you're a resident of the province, then your child doesn't pay double taxation. And she didn't go the next step and say, well, if she wants to build a summer home on it and put a cottage on it, I don't want my name in the mortgage. Well, then what you do is you keep the life interest, you let the daughter have the property in her name, and the daughter doesn't pay double taxation. The daughter builds a cottage, puts a mortgage on it, and then the mother just signs off the mortgage that for the mortgage document, she's giving up her life interest in the mortgage, but not in the property. Okay? So there's different things that have to happen.
It's only a lawyer can explain that.
Yeah, I didn't realize that before. That's tricky.
No, nothing's tricky, just legal. Anyway, I'm going to thank you very much. I really appreciate your coming. And thank you very much. And here's some cards. And will you send Pat to me a letter?
I'll forward it right on there.
Since you have some friends that didn't come.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure you've got a couple of your friends. Okay.